Okay, so welcome everyone to this presentation in which I'm going to talk a little bit about a work in progress paper that my colleague Markus Helfen and myself are working on currently. We are both at the Freie Universität Berlin. And so in this paper, we are really thinking about the question how organizational routinization is linked to field-wide institutionalization processes, and that in the context of establishing procedural rules for global labor standards. And specifically, we're doing this on the example of global framework agreements, which I will introduce you to. Yes. So my agenda for the presentation is quite straightforward, I guess. I'm going to talk a little bit about the background of the paper. Then I will briefly touch upon the methods that we use, talk about the results, and then I'm really happy to get your input and questions and everything. And coming to the background, how did we develop a question? How did we come up with this approach? Is that I think in this room I don't have to talk too much about the fact that there are really a lot of harsh infringements of labor standards in global value chains, such as safety, health and safety issues, or issues of child labor or forced labor, or we also have the question of the right of association. I hope no one speaks Chinese here because I didn't translate the thing, but yeah, just to give an image. So this is the one side. And then on the other side, we think that global framework agreements might actually be a quite interesting tool to mitigate these different infringements of labor standards. So why do we think so, and what are global framework agreements? I think they're maybe less known probably than the due diligence legislations that we have heard about a bit now. So these are agreements that are established between multinational corporations on the one side, and then global union federations on the other side of the bargaining table. And so what makes them interesting, really, from our perspective, is that in contrast to other CSR measures, for example, is that they are really, that from the beginning on, this is kind of part of their definition, their core, is that they are established together with labor. It's really labor that always plays a very important role in negotiating these agreements. And partly, this depends really very much on the case, but also in the implementation process of the global framework agreements. And also what we think is quite interesting, that what distinguishes the global framework agreements a bit, let's say often from other standards, for example, is that they don't only establish the labor standards, but they also talk about how these labor standards are to be implemented in practice. Not all of them, but a lot of the texts do. And so that's quite interesting too. So bringing these two things together, Markus and I, together with some other colleagues, have been working in a larger research project over the past 2 years that is researching the implementation process of these global framework agreements. So this has been financed by the Hans-Böckler-Stiftung in Germany, and the two organizations or universities engaged in this, Freie Universität Berlin and the University of Essen. And so we have, in the course of this project, of course, we've looked into a variety of different data and sources available to analyze this implementation process. And we have so this one question. So we have a lot of questions that come from this data to us, of course, but the question that we are focusing on in this paper is the following. So we have been looking into the literature that is already existing on the implementation of global framework agreements. And what we see is that a lot of them, or they vary to what they look at. So maybe they might focus, let's say, on the development process of the phase of negotiating and initiating these framework agreements, or they might look at, I don't know, monitoring processes, for example. And so we thought it would be interesting to develop kind of a more encompassing picture. What is it? What are different steps that belong to the whole of global framework agreements? And so what could you say does a GFA process look like? What belongs into this process? Then, furthermore, we have done quite a detailed text analysis of the different GFAs that exist until today. I think we have counted 128 that are active right now. And what we see, like a hint that we see also in this analysis, is that there's certainly a certain process going on of routinization, because we see that already the texts are changing over time. So they become more detailed, for example, when it comes to the implementation processes. And they are renegotiated amongst the companies and the global union federations. And so we thought, okay, there are certainly elements of inter-organizational routinization that we find in relation to the GFAs. Then lastly, we also did quite a lot of interviews now. Originally, the idea was really to go and travel to the different countries and see how the GFAs are implemented. But with Corona, it got a little bit difficult, but still we got to do quite some interviews online, or also we have research partners now in different countries that really supported us in this. And the interviews also, the other sources did, but they also made clear that the GFAs are not standing by themselves, but of course they are very much linked also to a more institutionalized level, to a field level, as the laws, for example. As some of our respondents would tell us, for example, that they, as a member of the global union federations, they were actually implied in the process of developing the laws. So we thought, okay, so there is also this link to this field-wide institutionalization, and we would like to bring these three things in a way together and see how they are linked. How is the GFA process linked to inter-organizational routinization, linked to field-wide institutionalization? And so much about how we got for question from the data available, from the literature available on GFAs. But then we gave the question or the analysis also a theoretical twist in a way. So we are very much, we come from an organization studies background with this idea that we've already seen, or the idea of routinization has already popped up. So routinization via experimentation. And from organization studies, we also take, this perspective of institutional deficits. On the other side, we link this perspective of organization studies to industrial relations literature by taking this idea of conflicted collaboration. So, bringing in this focus really also on conflict, and what does conflict have to do with all of this. And linking this also, because we're talking about institutions, so we take this idea of institutional work and social skill, and together, so these give us this perspective, this question: how does routinization, institutionalization happen through conflict and collaboration? So, what did we do? I'll be quick on that, but just until now, for this paper, we thought, okay, we will not yet take in all the data that we collected, but we will start with a systematic literature review of the existing qualitative case studies that are already there, because obviously we're not the first who are concerned with global framework agreements, but there are actually 42 case studies that really go into depth also with the different cases of establishing GFAs. And so we oriented ourselves on this technique by Huhn, on a meta-synthesis of qualitative case studies, taking 5 steps. I'm not going to go into detail about all of them, but developing research questions that are decoding the data. We did that with Studia, and yeah, exactly, interpreting the data and developing kind of a model, a heuristic model out of that. So coming to this heuristic scheme, because I guess that's also something that we can discuss as well, as it looks for now, is yeah, I was starting with this idea of the process of the GFA development, and so we think that you can clearly distinguish kind of two key steps, if you like. The first is the establishment of the GFA text as such. And this consists also of different elements, of course. The second larger part is the enactment of the GFA context. So once the text is established, then the question is, how do we get this content of the text actually into practice? And so the establishment of the GFA text begins with this idea of initiating and negotiating the content of the text, which we have just heard in context of the laws is really, I mean, a very intense process, and which very much definitely also impacts the way then that the enactment is done. Because already there you will have the question, who is actually part of this initiating and negotiating process, and this will also influence who will be part later on, and how are the relationships that have already been established in this first part, how will they play out then later on in the enacting of content. Then the enactment phase, if you like, for us consists again of different parts. There's for one this the practices that are linked to monitoring what is happening in practice, so which can take on very, very different formats. You can develop a hotline system, for example, where cases can be reported to, but you can also go very actively in the field and establish, monitoring committees that go around the country. So there's a wide variety that you can put into each of these little bubbles that I said there. But so there are monitoring practices. And then on the other side, there are intervening, what we call intervening practices. So where you go further, you don't just observe what is there, important first step, definitely, but you also go further and you try to implement and to change what is happening in practice. And these two, they're constantly evaluated and renegotiated. And so if you move in this lower circle, if you like, you move around this for quite a while. It can happen in some cases. It doesn't happen in all cases, but it can happen that you move back again, actually, to the establishment of the GFA text, as the GFA text might run out, or it is evaluated in a not ideal way, and so the parties will get back together again and renegotiate the way that the things that are written down in the GFA text. So that much about the process. Now, coming from our perspective of industrial relations and conflicted collaboration, of course, we see that this process is not happening in a void, but it's happening behind the background of these conflicted collaboration in the global value chains. And here different actors are involved in these two different activities on these two different levels. So in the establishment of the text, you have headquarter actors, so you have the global union federations, and mostly you have headquarter management. But then when you move down to the enactment, you have a broader variety of actors, as here local actors are most of the time taken into account much more. And so this is really not a normative picture, but that is what we see right now. This is really something that you can question as well. Why does it have to be this way? Yeah, but that's what we see right now. And now, so we think that the GFA process is interesting in relation to this conflicted collaboration because it provides kind of a space for these conflicted relationships to materialize, to to crystallize, if you like, and to become apparent. So they're not just there, but they're actually rooms for conflict to arise. And in our view, that's quite a positive thing, actually. So you might have really big conflicts developing in the establishment of the texts. You have really big conflicts as well in the enactment of the GFA's content. And so the reaction, or how these conflicts are played out, differs greatly. So you might see that there's a conflict coming up. For example, you see there's a large infringement on labor rights in, let's say, the supply chain, or also in the MSC itself, that really contradicts the ideas of the GFAs. And in some cases, just nothing happens, actually. There might not be any local actors that, or they might not even know about the existence of the GFA, or they might not have the strength or motivation or whatever, so nothing happens. But then you might have other cases where actually the conflicts trigger a sort of experimentation. So maybe there is a local union, or it's just a worker in the organization who thinks, I've heard about this thing, this document, I've never really seen anything about it, but why don't I try and get in touch with the headquarter unions? I've heard they have a strong position, and they try that out. And sometimes it dies off there, it just happens once and there's no reaction. Sometimes it turns into what we might see as a process of inter-organizational routinization. So it happens again and again, and maybe it changes. Of course, it changes a little bit, but we've heard this in the interviews. There's like a mechanical reaction to certain cases that come up, and so that's quite interesting to see. And what we definitely see is that the way on how these conflicts develop, from conflict to experimentation to maybe routinization, depends also a lot on the institutional context. So on the field level, you might have actors such as financial institutions or also the media. They might influence greatly how the development of the initiating and negotiating processes, how they develop, if they are successful or not. You might have policymakers that have a huge impact on whether and how the GFAs are actually implemented, because they make life so much easier or more difficult in diverse countries for labor to organize it all and to link internationally. On the other side, we also really believe that there's also the other direction. So the GFA processes, they also influence what is happening on the field level, and you see this in different cases, as for example, NGOs are kind of drawn into the process, or also international organizations as the ILO, for example. They are written into the GFA text saying, okay, the ILO, for example, should serve as a mediator in case of conflicts that we can't resolve within the global value chain. So the ILO comes in. So we believe that the GFA texts, they begin to change also the practices and influence the practices and the discourses also in these field level organizations. And another example is, for example, that quite some texts, or not so many actually, but some texts, they might say, for example, okay, the MNC will begin to work together with other MNCs so as to create a level playing field, and so really try to change labor standards on this field level so as to make it easier within the company itself to implement the GFAs. And so in this way, we see that there's certainly, there's a back and forth between these two. And this is really where we are at right now, where we are trying to get more precise with the literature that we have, maybe later on also with the other data that we have, to draw out even more, all the different flashes that I have in the picture right now. And so that's it for this presentation.